Today we are having the session on the emergence of women's studies in India, debates, challenges, and changing contexts by Professor Indu Agnihotri, which is the first in our gender discourse webinar series, which is organized by All India Women's Studies Students Forum and in association with UGC, Hardasan University, and Regional Association for Women's Studies. The topic becomes all the more relevant in the current context because the subject is going through the subject along with many other minority subjects are going through a crisis, and we are facing challenges, and the future of the subject is uncertain, and so it makes the topic all the more relevant. uh, in order to get an idea about the All India Women's Studies Students Forum that we are all part of now, uh, I invite Sumit to give us all an idea about the objectives of the forum. Sumit? Sumit? Uh, Sumit, can you please unmute?
Are you listening me?
Yeah.
Are you all listening me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sumit from Bihar. And first of all, thank you very much to creating All India Women Study Students Association. Uh, the major objective of this organization, first of all, I want to say that I am not very friendly with English language. So if I will be not much friendly with English, so please pardon me to not very fluently. Okay, it's okay. My mother tongue is Hindi. The major objective of this organization is to uh, follow the issues, we the students of women studies are facing in the current scenarios an era of new era where the government is completely tried to finish this subject. We have the major challenges, how we will survive in this very difficult situation. To survive or develop the discipline, we have we have created this organization, All India Women Study Student Federation. So it is its major objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumit.
Okay.
So, I would like to add on to what Sumit was saying about the objectives of the forum. We would like to make women's studies more visible in the academic, as an academic discipline. It is visible, but still, we like to make it more uh, more visible in all space, even in UG level, and also would like to lobby for including this subject in set and other government exams, and we also have to discuss about the interdisciplinary nature of women's studies, and also to mainstream the subject. So thanks Sumit, thank you for introducing. And now, okay, so now we shall move on to the session. Before that, before that, I would like to say that we can all use the chat boxes, and while we are listening to the session, we can all use the chat boxes, and you can note down the queries, and we can all have an interactive session after the session is over. Now I'd like to invite Ashmita to introduce the speaker, Professor Indu Agnihotri. Ashmita, please.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
Professor Agnihotri taught history in Vivekananda College, Delhi, before she joined Center for Women's Development Studies in 2004. She recently retired as the director of CWDS. She's based in Delhi and has been associated with the women's movement since the 1970s. She was also closely associated with Delhi's EDWA's Delhi unit since its inception, and was working as the editor of its publications Women's Equality and Samya till the mid-1990s. She has also written extensively on gender and history and the women's movement in India. She's also worked with some of the stalwarts of the women's movement like Veena Mazumdar and Neera Desai. Without taking much of her time, I would now like to invite Professor Agnihotri to please start the session. Welcome you, ma'am.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. So, thank you very much. I'd firstly like to congratulate those who have taken this initiative to organize this gathering, as well as the association that is being planned. I think women's studies is at a point where it needs multiple initiatives initiatives from different platforms to take it forward, to bring more stability to the discipline and to the existing women's studies centers, and also to provide a more hopeful and secure future to those who are students as well as practitioners of women's studies. So thank you very much, and I would like to congratulate those of you who have taken this initiative, and I wish you all strength, with the hope that you will choose to steer your path along the lines of a commitment to democracy and democratic movements, because many associations are formed, many gatherings come together, but the times we live in are such that different viewpoints can emerge, and different viewpoints are very good in terms of debate, but in terms of a fruitful, constructive, positive intervention on behalf of women's studies, I hope you will stick to that objective and move along with that objective. Now, the topic that has been given to me is very, very vast, and I don't think anyone can do justice to it in such a short time. But I would like to say that, when we speak of women's studies, we are also speaking of and on behalf of women. So it's not an abstract discipline, and I think that remains a key aspect of women's studies till today, that it connects with people, it connects with the lives of women, even as it transforms us who are practitioners of women's studies, and even as it brings new aspirations and objectives to us, both in terms of our individual lives as well as in terms of our collective being as practitioners of women's studies, who may be part of a center, who may be part of a college department, who may be job aspirants. So there is an abstractness to the category, as well as there is a real context to the category. And I think, when I was trying to jot down a few points for this discussion today, I was alongside that reading that whole news item about this young student from a Delhi University college who committed suicide because of restrictions or limitations and her inability to access education in these present times. So this is the wider context in which women's studies is also sort of struggling to stay alive, struggling to find more of a stable place for itself. And that wider context needs to be kept in mind when we have our discussion. Going back to the evolution of women's studies, I may state, as Ashmita said, I was a student of history. The history that I studied when I was a student really did not feature women at all. In fact, my first entry point in a discussion on women's studies was when I was asked if I would make a presentation at the Bombay conference, on the first national conference on women's studies in 1981, on the history syllabus of the universities. And I picked up 4 universities, that is Jamia, Delhi University, or 3 universities, I think, which existed at that time. JNU, where I had studied, DU also, where I had studied, and I was involved with the initial program already in 81, and Jamia. And I looked at it and I said, look, it can be said in one word that there is no visibility of women anywhere in this history. The women may have been there in history, but they were not visible. So the discussions that we became a part of were both to lay out the field of women's studies and lay it out for ourselves also in terms of our concerns, what should be our entry points. So my entry point, as Ashmita said, in a sense, at the same time that women's studies was evolving, at the same time activism around women's rights was developing in Delhi, particularly where I was residing. And for me, the question was, what does women's studies tell me to understand the lives of the women I'm interacting with on the streets and in the bastis of Delhi? And what is it that they are telling me which I can bring as concerns into women's studies? So from my location, really, it was that. And subsequently, of course, I joined Center for Women's Development Studies, first in the 1990s, where I was specifically assigned the task because by the mid-90s, actually women's studies or work related to and research related to women had become more visible. And we must understand how this happened. So firstly, there was, of course, the International Women's Year and the International Women's Decade. There was Towards Equality, the Committee on the Status of Women in India. But I think above all, what was very, very clear to us when we were students in the 1970s, that there were growing attacks on women. There were growing incidents of violence related to both caste and gender, or caste violence inflicted on women in very specific gendered ways in terms of criminal sexual assault. For instance, the caste-based killings in Tamil Nadu, where agricultural workers were struggling, the Kilvenmani struggles, which Maithili Shivraman first wrote about. North India was particularly witness to caste-based violence in rural India. And you will find that the discussions that we were reading in the 70s, these were not in academic textbooks really, because women were largely missing. In the name of objectivity, social science was also so objective that there was no gender, and so there was no presence of women in the textbooks that we were studying or the literature that we were reading at that time. In fact, the first few readings that we got came from journals or magazines, journals like Social Scientist, EPW, Mainstream, Frontier, any number of small booklets and pamphlets which were coming up even during the emergency and definitely post-emergency. And the whole issue of struggle for democratic rights during the emergency brought women's activism also into the fore, and late 70s saw this development, which was, say, our generation in its youth at that time. And that is how we were drawn into these struggles. It is around that time that the Indian Council for Social Science Research also decided to follow up on the findings of the Towards Equality report. And Towards Equality report had very categorically highlighted 2-3 things. It had highlighted the unequal status of women, of course, in every chapter on sex ratio, education, law, economy, work, health, and the works, cultural aspect, media. It had highlighted the inequality. More than that, it had highlighted the need for policy-based interventions and in sort of formal responses to address this inequality. But above all, what struck people like me who were reading towards equality in the sort of mid-decade of the 1970s really, was the understanding that towards equality put forward, that women's unequal status is not a result of some kind of only, I mean, you know, not only historical baggage or of backwardness or mindsets and mental attitudes. Of course, these were all part of the problem, but that if women's unequal status had to be addressed, the primary objective and the crucial link was to be in terms of the path of development and how it was developmental paths which had marginalized women. So it was a historically constructed backwardness or marginalization. It was not a given, which is what colonial writings on India tried to show, that in India this is how women were. So towards equality contested all these different aspects to say official policy must intervene to address these inequalities and grant to women both the ability and the opportunity to enjoy the rights that the Constitution of India had given. And in a sense, that was our starting point for a larger debate. Individually, we may have come from different ideological backgrounds, but what brought us together and what brought a whole generation of young women together on diverse platforms, but with one objective, that yet we want to enjoy the equality that our Constitution promises us. Some of us may have wanted to go beyond the Constitution, and we may still be wanting to do that, but the Constitution provides us a kind of a consensus document and the format within which this negotiation could happen, both in the economy, in the sphere of education, in law, in the domain of culture, which has been emerging as a very big site of conflict and holding women back. So that was one broad background. There was also an international context, that there was already a debate on at the international level. If you have been part of women's studies courses, you may have seen it and read about it as what we call the WID-WAD-GAD debate. Basically, it related to, again, what I just talked about from towards equality, that the issue was, what was the path of development? What was developmental path and policy doing to the lives of women? Was it further marginalizing them? If that was the case, then we had to critically engage with it. And at the international level, a similar and very long and very constructive debate, intense debate was happening with countries and activists and academics from Mexico, Brazil, Chile, you name it, the first world, of course, USA, UK, the Scandinavian countries, other countries of Europe, and the whole debate about what that we call the development debate. And the development debate had 2-3 aspects: how to incorporate gender within the mainstream. Then there was a question about what was mainstream and what I don't know. Am I audible? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Okay. Because I'm getting a phone call and I was wondering whether it was to do with something to do with this. What the development debate was saying was not only that we want to include women, I mean, like gender and development or women and development, but also what is development? What constitutes development? How is development to be envisioned? And some of the early concerns addressed what we see today in terms of environment debates, climate change, marginalization of women in agriculture, loss of land rights, loss of work, employment. And so the development debate in the 70s was a very, very intense debate, which also influenced the work and the setting up of what we call the development studies institutions, both in India as well as abroad. It laid out an objective. And the other aspect of it was, for instance, the invisibilization of women's contribution to society. So Esther Bostrup, for instance, raised the whole thing of women's role in agriculture based on studies from different continents, Africa, Asia, etc. So and Veena Mazumdar, for instance, Devki Jain later, many of these people joined in these debates, and there was a whole history and a sort of very vibrant atmosphere challenging this. Lourdes Beneria, for instance, from Latin America, and the Latin American women were in fact very much ahead in some of these debates. So that was also an international context. So it was in a sense about inclusion of women, but not inclusion of women on an as is, where is basis, but inclusion in terms of equal opportunities, opportunities in terms of determining and with autonomy as to what should be the path of development. So these were some of the contexts from which discrimination, exclusion, oppression, women's oppression were to be addressed, and this was laid out. If we go to the ICSSR, the UN bodies, UNESCAP, the whole ECOSOC bodies, related bodies intervene, and a number of meetings were held, for instance, in Delhi, in the South Asian and Southeast Asian countries around some of these issues. And it was in this context that the 1981 conference took place, where we had several plenary kind of sessions, which were general discussions on ideology, Marxism, feminism, etc., the link and the tensions between Marxism and feminism, on women's political participation, some kind of thematic discussions on politics, work, economy, etc., and entire sessions to discuss the syllabus of universities to say how to make women visible. And then, of course, there was a discussion in terms of what should be done. This was at two levels. One was in terms of the disciplinary sort of academic intervention. And there was, I remember in the history group where I was present, Professor Aparna Basu was convening that session. And we had this discussion, should we have a paper on women in Indian history, say modern Indian history, or should it be pervasive along the entire syllabus? And almost unanimously, most of us felt that it should be, making women visible and from a women's studies perspective, in a sense, within existing disciplines was to be taken up as a priority. It was felt that if you put, one of the things discussed was have options. So a women's studies course in the political science syllabus, for instance. And the response was that if we put it as an option, then maybe 3 or 4 women students will take it, others will not take it. So the perspective of women's studies will not percolate and penetrate the larger body of our syllabus, our curriculum. And it was even discussed that if questions are not posed, then even if you put a topic in the course and in the units, it will still not be studied nor taught if questions are not posed in the examinations. So the understanding that was developed was that we should specifically push for visibilization of women in our curriculum, building a women's studies perspective into the academic curriculum that exists across different universities. Then, of course, the other point that was raised during this period in Bombay was what was the platform through which discussions on women, women's rights, etc., or equality were to be advanced. And, the older generation, I've written about this in the IWS publication, that the older generation of women like Neeraben, Madhuri Shah, who was by that time heading the University Grants Commission, they were saying, oh, these young women, they're not interested in these kind of issues. Look at our generation. We were from the freedom struggle and we had all these larger questions in mind. And some of us said, what are the platforms you have provided? Is there a platform within the college institutional format where these questions can be raised? So it was as a result of some of these debates in Bombay in 1981, and Madhuri Shah being, heading the, she was UGC chair by this time, and she had been Vice Chancellor of SNDT Bombay before she took over. So what happened was that the UGC took the initiative because of this interaction. And this interaction, we must understand that all of us were coming from different and diverse locations. It was both academic as well as one foot in the movement or in small groups where some of these issues were discussed. So, and that has remained. It was subsequent to this discussion in 1981, this conference, that the decision to set up IAWS was taken, and two institutions, SNDT Bombay and CWDS Delhi, played a major role in this. These were two founding institutions for the IAWS, which was registered in 1982 and subsequently held conferences right through. So that is the broad background through which UGC then took the decision. By 1984, this decision had already been taken, two levels, women's studies centers in the university and women's development cells to be set up in colleges. So for instance, the college where I was teaching, Vivekanand College in Delhi University, which was a first generation learners college primarily in East Delhi. And, you know, a lot of thought went into where to start these institutions, the sections of women which needed sort of more support. Also making sure both in terms of regional spread, so Delhi, Chandigarh, Jadavpur, Banaras, AMU, a kind of regional spread across to reach out to different Bombay, of course, RCWS became one of the centers. So that was later Mother Teresa and some of the universities in the south expanded, Utkal, etc. So there was a conscious planning behind it. Now, I think ICSSR also started giving fellowships with priority also in a sense to subjects of research which focused on women, and this discussion both because of the pressure of the movement and this sort of churning within the disciplines. In the meantime, those of you who may have studied some of these disciplines would know that the 80s also saw a churning in the disciplines. For instance, in my discipline of history, the subalterns arrived, the postmodernists and various other developments, then the whole phase of cultural studies in the 1990s. So disciplines were also changing. In history, there was a discussion about history from below, people's history, those kind of, which made space. So the academic disciplines were also changing. Sociology was changing. There's a whole issue of the seminar on how sociology was developing. I think it's in the mid-90s you'll see that issue. And I'm sure different disciplines had similar experiences. So it was this convergence and sort of coalescence of these different factors, a political consciousness flowing out on the streets with very militant programs by women and women of diverse sort of social groups, Basti women claiming rights as citizens, etc., and an academic churning and a conscious pressure. I remember after Bombay, any number of meetings we attended. For instance, the All India Christian Higher Education, IHA, organized discussions where some of us presented about why institutions should focus on women. So this kind of sensitization and sensitivity. By the mid-90s, what we find is when the context, larger context is again changing in a different way. I had talked about the emergency, and now we were into a different phase of globalization, neoliberal state. very, very high-pitched fundamentalist, community-based, identity-based assertions. All that was happening. And it is by the mid-90s, however, the advantage was that women's studies perspectives had sort of invaded, infiltrated, and transformed existing social science disciplines. So there was a lot of research on the table, a lot of good reading material was available for people to figure out how to probe further. So there was a possible. And I remember we had this discussion in CWDS. Professor Dhanagre was there, Jasodradi was there, Utsa Patnaik was there, and some people from the ICSSR. And there was this discussion that a lot of courses happen outside India, where people go for summer, winter courses, etc., to get methodological training in women's. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, ma'am. Please continue.
So it was as a preliminary discussion, it was decided that we now have enough material to offer courses, because till then women's studies centers were also functioning primarily as what was called research and extension based activities. There was teaching was not laid out as a priority in any of the women's studies centers till the mid-90s, till 1997 almost, in fact. So around 1995 at CWDS, Professor Neera Desai, who was the chairperson of CWDS, and Professor Veena Mazumdar took the initiative after this discussion to go and meet the UGC chairperson again, Professor R. Mighty Desai, and it was decided that CWDS would develop a refresher course in women's studies, which would be offered in different universities, and it would be then it would initiate scholars and university-based, college-based teaching faculty to incorporate gender concerns and women's studies perspectives in their own teaching. So this course, in fact, I was assigned the responsibility of developing this course, which I did, and CWDS held a workshop in the early 1996 on how to sort of go about designing this kind of course. And we thought of broadly 2-3 areas. So one was in terms of the conceptual frameworks, the social construction of gender, and concepts and methods, social construction of gender, and then issues for further research. So this was the broad format. And the courses were then taught first in Delhi University, twice in Jadavpur, and then the 4th course was offered in JNU. So these were the early beginnings of attempting to bring the research that had been generated over the last previous 1.5 decades, in a sense, into the teaching format. And I think this took off very well, because immediately other universities began to want to offer courses, and they sort of took this module, this design that had been developed at CWDS, and went ahead and drew a lot of people into. There was, of course, a lot of debates and discussions, which I'll come to gradually. The IWS conferences, in fact, generated a lot of reading material, etc. Now, the debates and the problematic issues, you can say, not problematic in terms of that they are problems, but the problematic in terms of the academic queries, the critical process of inquiry. There were 3-4 aspects that we can say broadly, which continued, and I think which have continued till today to be part of our discussions, either upfront or in the background. The first, as I said, was the whole question of should women's studies be offered as separate courses or as a perspective. I think till the late 90s, broadly, we were in the mode of developing women's studies as a perspective. It is in the late 90s when teaching began that courses came to be offered in terms of longer duration, not short courses, workshops, etc. And even master's program, the MPhil, I think many started first with the MPhil program and doctoral studies. But I think by 2000, we were moving to a phase of master's programs. Again, there was a debate, and I think that debate still stays relevant. And this is, it's not just in India. You can see this debate has happened in the US, in the UK, in Europe, in all centers. Because should women's studies remain as a perspective within the core disciplines of the social sciences, for instance? Now we can say we have extended to life sciences, natural sciences, etc. also, because there's a lot of discussion and debate around gender and women in these disciplines also. But primarily, to begin with, it was social sciences, arts faculties, and humanities. These were the three areas within which women's studies perspectives were sort of initiated and which found a natural home, often in the sociology department. So this began. Now, that was one debate which has persisted. To cut a long story short on that aspect, I would say we have seen both models and both have worked. Both have worked. If the problems exist not necessarily because of trying to resolve whether it should be only research or masters, because I think there is a case for both, and both have given us very positive experiences. So this mixed model, in a sense, works. The problems that are coming and the uncertainties that are plaguing the centers and students who've emerged from these courses and programs are because of other reasons, not because of the design of the program necessarily. That is one aspect. The second aspect is in terms of, should it be a separate department, or should women's studies draw on guest faculty, or as we would say, associate faculty, adjunct faculty? Primarily till say 2000 or so, most women's studies centers were functioning with adjunct, associate faculty, and directors who were primarily located in other disciplines. So each one would be either from literature or history or political science or whatever. There was no full-time faculty, no full-time staff even, or very skeletal staff in terms of assistants, office assistants, but not core faculty. From, I think, late 90s, early 2000, this begins to change, and some universities begin to offer resources for full-time faculty. That still remains a problem. So this is also in terms of the courses to be offered. Should these be separate students, or should be students across certain faculties and disciplines? So a core course in women's studies, say the JNU model, or should it be separate streams of courses run by women's studies centers? And again, I think the experience is mixed. I think there is a case for both. There is a case for drawing in students across faculties. Aligarh, for instance, did that for a long, long time with great success, with great demand for those courses, I remember. Similarly, you would say there is a need for gender sensitization as well as a more academic formal engagement with categories of gender, women, and experiences, etc. For those who may not necessarily be students directly in women's studies departments, etc. Now, can you hear me? Because my thing is showing something very different.
Yeah, ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay.
But someone is sharing the screen now. Sorry.
Yeah, because some screen sharing is happening, so I don't know what that is. So that was another. Then there was another debate, which is, of course, which still continues, and it's the most lively, the most constructive debate, which is so going beyond perspective versus discipline, going beyond department versus centers, to the concepts and the analytical tools. I mean, this was faced in other locations, other countries as well, that if you want to transform yourself as a discipline, then what are your core concepts? What are your conceptual tools? What are your methodologies? So from, say, late 90s, early 2000 onwards, we started having more debates around these. And there again, it was a big debate, because for a section of women, both in the movement as well as in women's studies, the core tools were sex, gender, patriarchy. I would say, I'm trying to think what else. These were the core tools. Some of us, both from our experience in the movement as well as in academics, felt that, say, social sciences in India offer such a rich perspective, and rich perspectives which need to be incorporated into women's studies analysis. So gender, sex, gender and patriarchy may not be sufficient tools. And this had come up, I remember, in the workshop that CWDS had organized in 1996, when we were trying to design the first refresher course on women. It was very categorically said, and I think the report is somewhere in the files in CWDS, that we need a cluster of concepts which includes sex, gender, patriarchy, but additionally other concepts drawing upon our disciplinary backgrounds to understand both society as well as women's experience in society, etc. That was one. There was, of course, a much richer debate again. So, I mean, on the point of concepts, class, caste, or ethnicity, race, for instance, in other locations, these were discussed, and it was felt that a combination and a cluster of conceptual categories was required, not just to sound proper, but to understand the depth and the multifaceted, multi-level, diverse sides and aspects of women's oppression. The same thing went into the whole discussion on what is meant by women and the category of women or gender. This also was a very big debate. Now, this was a debate in the movement where a section of autonomous feminists were definitely focusing on patriarchy and on a feminist construction of sort of envisioning the movement, whereas the mass organizations were from the beginning critiquing and questioning the category of women and gender, saying there is no homogeneous category of gender, there is caste in India, there is class in India, there are various multiple sites of oppression and discrimination. So, for instance, one of the largest mass organizations, ADWA, put it in 3 levels. It said, in terms of your rights as women's rights as citizens, women's rights as members of an oppressed class or category of society, and as on the basis of their being women, which is specifically a more gendered aspect of oppression. But that women in India, to understand their struggles and to understand their status, we needed to look at this sort of 3-pronged or 3-level, multi-level site and location of oppression. This came up in international debates. Also, for instance, you will remember that when we started out in the late 70s, early 80s, the whole slogan was sisterhood and solidarity on the basis of sisterhood. And then people like Chandra Mohanty and various others, I mean, I'm forgetting the names right now, but so many people raised the issue of what is sisterhood? I mean, how is sisterhood constituted? Will sisterhood be focused around white elite or even non-elite feminists from first world countries? So there was a third world critique of sisterhood and solidarity coming. But think the most interesting part was there were continuous debates. There was a continuous engagement and rethinking on the ground also. And the interaction between the movement and scholars allowed for a more constructive and very enriching debate, including from different ideological perspectives. So, you had the classical feminist groups, etc. You had some coming from more Marxist orientations. In the 70s and 80s, the socialist groups in India were very, very visible, which seem to have been sort of going under and disappearing now. But in the 70s and 80s, post-emergency, the socialist political tendency was very, very active in the movement and visible. So there were all these different perspectives. And of course, there were those perspectives which were antithetical to any discussion on women's rights, which may be more prominent today or more prominent in asserting a certain notion of womanhood. These debates in India had happened in the time of the national struggle, the freedom struggle, and post-freedom struggle. So these different locations and interpretations of sex, gender, women, womanhood, etc., were sort of jostling for space, support, and in the academic domain as well as the movement. I think another level of the debate was, I mean, for instance, which we saw when CWDS was going to go in for this program with Ambedkar University. By that time already a discussion had happened at the larger level of, should we be saying women's studies? Should we be saying gender studies? And you may have noted that the CWDS program with Ambedkar University was called Women's and Gender Studies. So, I believe these debates are still happening, for instance, in some programs where women's studies department programs are located, centers and departments. So these different kind of, but I think what is important is that from countries like India, what was coming about was that if you looked at the issues, firstly, what were the issues? I mean, sex ratios continued to be an issue for us. Women in education, I just talked about that young student from Adele University College. We all know that education has a positive side of the story, and yet there are very specific gender-based discriminations and exclusions, and the pandemic may have increased these, not only on account of gender, but also poverty and inequality. And how online education makes it even more challenging. So those discussions are there. But women's continued declining. Work participation was first noticed in 1921, and the Towards Equality talks about it. And of course, now for the last 10, 12 years, we haven't stopped talking about it, and the pandemic may have made it worse. Similarly, in terms of health, reproductive health, violence, increasing violence, etc. The migration, rural India, rural economy, agriculture, urban labor, domestic work, I mean, the list is endless. Trafficking, dowry, sexual assault, we can go on. I don't think this is the forum for me to narrate some of these, but I think it's important that women's studies students and scholars continue to engage with both. I mean, one is field-based studies, micro studies, macro data, analyze the trends, along with everything else that we are doing. I think women's studies has done a very good job of bringing in discussions on from backgrounds and contexts of cultural studies perspectives. But I would say that while we adopt and embrace the cultural studies perspective, we should not abandon other locations, other disciplinary locations, which strengthen and enrich women's studies analysis in gendered ways, as well as in terms of larger social roots and embeddedness of patriarchal structures, structural embeddedness of inequality that women are subjected to. I will jump because there's no way I can discuss everything here. I can see what the time is. I think the 1990s poses a specific challenge. I've already mentioned neoliberalism, globalization. Why is it important here? Because some might think it's a political agenda. I'm very clear that neoliberal paradigm and the abandonment of the universal rights commitment by the state across the world, also by the Indian state from the 1990s, has led to a situation where it's like you're creating at the level of official policy, you are creating unequal citizens. So, for instance, the women's movement first saw it in terms of PDS. So there was a universal rights framework in terms of PDS, then it became targeted PDS, and as some of my activist friends very rightly put it, that the 90s saw women struggling to be designated as poor so that they could get the right to food security from official schemes and subsidies, etc. Similarly, you will find that the abandonment of the universal rights framework creates a situation where and withdrawal of the state from welfare schemes, from those programs, leads to a cut in the size of the pie and different castes, communities jostling for that piece of the shrinking pie. And I think 90s, while there is a positive aspect to the identity-based struggles that the 90s brought in, ushered in first through the anti-Mandal agitation that time, and then, of course, in the women's movement in terms of Dalit women and Dalit women speaking differently, Dalit women's assertion, Dalit feminism, etc. But I think we need to remember that in the background is a neoliberal state which is not accepting and recognizing the rights of each citizen. And I think the manner in which the whole citizenship debate has evolved in more recent times has to be taken back to those aspects. And both neoliberalism and fundamentalism, which we saw in the 1990s. That is one aspect. More than anything else, this shapes the location of the women's studies centers because, I mean, what do we find? Where are we today? Today, any discussion that we have, apart from all the conceptual, intellectual arguments, I mean, the concerns which have brought you together. Where are the women's studies centers? Where are they to be located? What is the funding? What? You have to understand that earlier you had a conceptual framework of universal right to education, and the Right to Education Act was brought in on that basis. Today you have a new education policy. I have not studied it in great depth, although I have looked at it. But I'm just referring to certain articles and critiques that I have read from Poonam Batra from Delhi University, Anita Rampal from Delhi University, Professor Anil Sadgopal, who was also with CIE. You have critiques from Kumkum Roy. You have Nirja Gopal Jayal's critique and Aisha Kidwai's. What are they saying? 2-3 things. One, right to learning, not right to education. 2, online education. Okay, now we've just seen what online education can mean. It can open possibilities like me talking to all of you across India, and yet it can also open up possibilities of further deprivations. So that also has to be kept in mind. The right to education is not talked about in the new education policy. Why is that? A new category as compared to the constitutional categories that we have now received over several decades of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes. Now it's a new category of socio-economically discriminated, SEDGs. What is it? I'm forgetting the exact SEDGs. And then special educational schools or zones which may be segregated. Segregated in terms of social segregation, not, and we all know what all these segregations and layers and levels of different sort of categories of citizenship will ultimately lead to. So what we are seeing is, whereas the aspiration among students, and especially students from the more marginalized categories, is towards greater inclusion and equality, in fact, our policy framework is moving towards more graded citizenship, more graded privileges, more graded exclusions in a sense. So, and if that is what the new education policy is about, we need to think. It talks of multidisciplinarity. The question that Professor Gopal and Kumkum Roy are both asking is, what is the experience? Have you assessed the experience of multi and interdisciplinarity? And there is no mention, unlike 1986 policy and the national curriculum framework, where gender and women's studies was specifically mentioned. And NCF 2005 CWDS was a part of those discussions. Some of the meetings were held in our center, in fact. Here, now no mention of women's studies in the education policy. So what I'm saying is that while we look at it in terms of the intellectual ramifications and debates, and those enrich us, they enrich our tools, they sharpen our tools. At the same time, there has to be a concrete engagement with the actual structures within which women's studies centers are located and are likely to be located. And there also we have huge experience of offering short-term courses, master's courses, doctoral research programs. All that needs to be reviewed. Has there been a review? And that brings me to the whole point about reviews. You would be surprised to know that in 2005, I think, if I remember, 2004-5, Veena Mazumdar, 2004, I think, Veena Mazumdar was appointed as chair of the UGC Standing Committee on Women's Studies. And she said, look, at my age, this is not what I can do, but I'll do a review. I'll do a review, hand over the report, and then you take it forward. Now, I'm just going to flag some issues from that report, just so that you know what we are talking about. Apart from all the experience which needs to be documented, and I think you people should document some of that experience. One point she said was that there were concerns expressed that women's studies had remained a scheme and did not become a full-fledged academic program, in spite of urging the universities to constitute departments. The issues raised and suggested solutions are summarized, and she went on to summarize. She says, women's studies has emerged as a discipline with a core area of theory and interdisciplinary framework that draws on theories from other disciplines, interdisciplinary knowledge from various social sciences, humanities, and sciences. As a new area of knowledge, it draws from its own studies and field action, etc., etc. It has transformed other disciplines. It is from this perspective that she made recommendations in that committee. Firstly, she said women's studies should be taken out. Its academic status should be moved out of the non-formal education unit in the UGC. Secondly, a supportive environment for women's studies should be created within the university system. A meeting of the directors of all the women's studies centers should be called by the UGC on a regular basis and at least annually. She had also said that the president of the IAWS should be a member of the UGC Standing Committee on Women's Studies, which used to be the case till about 1996. It was in 1996, during Murli Manohar Joshi's tenure as MHRD minister, that we found that IAWS suddenly stopped being called to the UGC Standing Committee discussions and meetings. She said also that women's studies should be entered in the civil service exams as a discipline. And of course, very detailed comments on NET, JRF, state SLET, SLET, etc. All that is there. Categorically, this report says constitution of departments. In the 11th plan, the UGC should accept in principle the need to convert all existing centers in universities into departments. This transition should be on the basis of 9th plan and different phases. As we all know, some are first phase centers, some are second phase, some are 5th phase now. So, but categorical recommendation that they should be taken out of schemes, taken out of non-formal education, built as departments, with a very categorical statement that this will bring stability, and that the state government as well as central government, depending on the location of the university, should absorb the costs after the planned period. Therefore, thereafter, there should be no centers. If a department and center both exist in a university, these should be merged. These directives should be included in the UGC plan document, etc., etc. Then she went on to talk about grants and the importance of grants to be made, full-time heads of women's studies centers and full-time faculty with no ambiguity in terms of where the salaries were going to come from. Permanence required with full-time and permanent faculty positions for women's studies. That was very clear in terms of vacancies, in terms of contractual staff, etc. Also there were. And then to facilitate the development of women's studies teaching programs, the existing centers should be brought under a broad-based faculty of interdisciplinary studies, which should be given statutory status under the Universities Act applicable for each state. With the emergence of many courses which are interdisciplinary in nature, it is a necessary requirement for the amendment of the Act. It further says that, okay, now of course, she mentions and emphasizes building linkages for incorporation of women's studies within the university system. And of course, also to take the academic intellectual learnings from women's studies into the disciplines, etc. I'll stop here. There's a lot in that. And she concludes to say that more than ever, the women's studies centers and the UGC can play a key role in bringing the voice of women to bear on what is happening in the country. I think that last statement of the conclusion of Veena's report remains relevant, even though it's, I think, more than 15 years that she wrote this. So to conclude my own presentation, what are the points I wish to raise? I want to say there has been a clear, visible uncertainty in the existence of women's studies centers, even though women's studies centers have contributed and enriched our academic institutions and platforms. Nevertheless, the manner of institutionalization of women's studies has been continuously plagued with uncertainty. So even though women's studies centers and their activities are showcased for NAC visits, etc., but in terms of other ways of recognition in the formal institutional platforms of the university system and the UGC, as well as the larger public sphere of education, there hangs this sense of informality, uncertainty. I'm also raising a question. Is this part of a larger backlash against women's studies? It's a question in my mind. It also needs to be remembered that women's studies has made a significant impact on those, on academia, on academics, and on practitioners of women's studies personally also. Despite the fact that there has been a tension in terms of the autonomy, both autonomy of the centers as well as of the practitioners. So, you know, we also need to understand that sometimes we don't engage with the university platforms and bodies, because we think, oh, these are all bureaucratic and we want to function in some autonomous space. But let us face it, if we are located within the bodies of higher education, then we need to make a space and create a niche for ourselves and create recognition in the formal platforms. At the same time, the whole debate on department versus multidisciplinary program status for women's studies, that's a continuing debate. I think both, there's a case for both models. Both perspectives of autonomy as well as of integration into a disciplinary format needs to be explored, and both have yielded positive results, provided there is certainty with regard to funding. We need to establish, I mean, for instance, also linkages with larger policy structures. I mean, for instance, when I went to Humboldt University in Berlin, what I found was there is a whole center which acts as a coordination between how policies are framed and how these translate within the university system in terms of both women students, the larger body of academia, etc. Do we play that role? Where are we in terms of the university's larger official bodies, statutory bodies? What is our role on that? What I'm saying is, there is a need to engage with all these, draw a formula for this. For instance, this whole discussion about why can women studies people not be taken into, say, history or political science posts when posts are advertised. What I'm saying is, today there's a formula and there's a score for everything. So engage, let us engage with the university system and say, okay, when you have a post in a particular department and a women's studies scholar applies with a PhD in women's studies, what is the formula? What is the mechanism? First, we must assert the right to appointment within the interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary centers, backgrounds, etc., and all faculties. But also let us concretely engage with it and say, when somebody from other disciplines applies in women's studies, then also a formula should be worked out in terms of what are the points to be given. After all, women's studies students can't be kept out both in women's studies and in other disciplines. So those kind of discussions need to happen. But I think what we need to be clear about is that we need to make more sensitive, friendly space for discussions on gender. These are today needed to make the university space more gender sensitive, but also more democratic. If the university spaces and higher educations have to function towards building democratic cultures, democratic practices and processes within academia, as well as in terms of the larger social life of academic institutions, then it is not enough for new education policy to announce an alternative structure to the UGC, whether it's the Higher Education Commission in India or whatever. The point is, you also need to engage with issues of how to make these spaces democratic in terms of entry of both genders as well as students from marginalized categories, and to make that space an interaction constituted along lines for enriching academic debate and pursuit of academics. So we need to also connect with contemporary struggles to, as I said, permeate the university with a sensitivity to gender and diversity with a commitment to social justice and inclusion of marginalized social groups. Today, there are many more kinds of struggles around women and gender. The courts are embroiled in some of these. These are reflected in our studies, which have produced a very, very rich repertoire. I think women's studies has been one of the most constructive inputs into academic discourse in India over the last 20, 30 years. But for that to happen, we need to be sure that Firstly, our country and our governments recognize the right to equal citizenship. They agree to address processes of social exclusion and marginalization, and they decide to put money where it is required, both in terms of budgets as well as gender budgeting, etc. So I think I've left out a lot of the points that I had made. It was a much longer presentation, but I'm sure you have more direct and concrete concerns, much more direct, concrete concerns. And I think in the days to come, you will address some of those. I think I'll stop here for now, and maybe we can have some discussion.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the question. Okay, we can take questions now. I think it is open. If you can please unmute and ask, if you can do that, or else you can use the chat box, and I shall read the questions.
Okay, it's better if you read, because I'll take time to go through now with all these. Yeah.
Yeah. I can read the questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Summary. Don't let's. I'm sure you don't have time for very long questions.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I'm Sri Kumar from Jamia Millia Islamia. I'm doing my PhD there, from Women's Studies Center.
Yeah.
Now, my question is, where do you see the men's studies? I know it's a problematic term, but where do you see the future of men's studies, and how do you place into the larger, growing intellectual tradition in India? Like, how do you place it?
Okay, is there something else related? Otherwise, I'll just respond to this. Well, I don't see something like men's studies. I see humans in all studies, men and women's studies conferences as well as women's studies centers have always not only welcomed but embraced men. And I think over the last 20 years, women's studies has embraced the debate on gender in a much more constructive way than any other discipline. The whole debate in terms of gender, queer, transgenders, alternate sexuality. I think it is women's studies which has made space for a much more healthy and open discussion on many of these aspects, which are part of our social discourse today. They are part of our legal discourse today. But I think women's studies has always made space and welcomed men within. So as I said, I have always believed that it is not about a gender war between men and women. So the category of women's studies is emerging from a marginalization and invisibilization of women. I don't think men have been subjected to such invisibilization. Of course, people have been. People have been subjected to invisibilization, but at least in my discipline, we started talking about people's history from the late 70s, and we transformed our discipline was transformed in the process and enriched. Women's studies centers have never had an anti-men policy, as far as I know. So, if you're talking about masculinity, those are, study, intellectual engagement with study on gender sensibilities, sensitivities, experiences in terms of be it femininity or masculinity or other identities, that's a different matter. But as I said, women's studies has embraced, not only accepted, but has embraced that debate. And it, in a sense, has contributed much more, both in terms of intellectual space as well as in terms of intellectual critiques of accepted norms of sexuality, gender, etc. Across the world, I think, not just in India. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Just to add to this, I wanted was this, you can correct me, was this not the basic debate between women's studies and gender studies which you mentioned in your talk also? So was it not related to masculinity studies that there was a difference point of view, maybe completely wrong?
Well, to some extent, yes, to some extent. But personally, I still locate myself within women's studies, because I think in women's studies there is enough scope. Gender, in a way, opens up the category, but it also abstracts it. It takes it to a level of abstraction, and there are other levels opening up queries. So I feel women's studies allows for it. In any case, as I had reported, I mean, there is writing, there are pieces in EPW, etc., on some of these issues. There's a larger debate across the world on gender and women's studies. I have been located from, and I still locate myself within the disciplinary perspective of women's studies. I feel it is it encompasses other aspects. It's how you interpret it and how you see it, you know, and how you practice it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
In any case, the debate has enriched the academic pursuit. Even that debate has enriched pursuit. Yeah.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, there is a question. Okay. So there are people asking about how to create more job opportunities, or how to make more centers or departments of women studies, and how to create more job opportunities. What would be the steps to do that?
Look, as I tried to hint at in my presentation, that is part of the larger problem within higher education. Where are the jobs? Okay, I don't know, but some 6 months ago, prior to the pandemic, I visited the college where I used to teach for some social occasion. And I found that nearly 70% of the staff in the college was temporary or ad hoc. I'm talking about the overall staff picture. In my own department of history, I think out of 7 posts, 4 were temporary or ad hoc, and had been for many, many years. Many years. I'm not talking about like 2 months, 3 months or something. Now, this has a longer history. When I first entered teaching, I remember Delhi University had a temporary teachers struggle. You know, they had a forum, a temporary teach, and some 700 teachers in 1978, 79 were made permanent after a big struggle by the Teachers Association. So there are no jobs. There is no money. Okay. And if women's studies does not find a slot within the university budget, this struggle will continue. So the only way to go forward is to get recognition as a department, to move towards a department, to get, especially, and this problem has increased after the collapse of the 5-year plan system. You know, once the government gave up the 5-year earlier, because it was coming with plan allocations and budgets, etc. After the 5-year plan system was abandoned, now it's like, for 6 months, you'll get a circular saying extension for 6 months to the Women's Studies Center's budget or commitment, or maybe 1 year. But why this uncertainty? I mean, there are students, there are teachers, there is staff, there's a whole structure there. And does the ministry or the UGC wish it away? So I think I would suggest to you all put down how many students, how many courses, what level of courses, pool that resource, so that tomorrow you have that information on your fingertips. I know IWS has some of it. I know money has been part of gathering that kind of information together. But I think you all should also know, so that tomorrow when you are in that struggle, you know what you are fighting about. How many students, how many at certificate level, how many at master's level, how many passed out, when was the course started, and today what is UGC saying about it? These are concrete, you know, questions, and they need concrete answers. So that is one. Secondly, of course, in terms of jobs, I mean, women's studies offers both. You have to remember, academic jobs will always be few. It's not as if everyone who passes out of women's studies will be absorbed into teaching, and everyone may not want to go into teaching. At a particular phase in the 80s, and in fact, I wanted to say that when the previous speaker asked me about gender, in fact, it was the NGO and developmental field which opened up the category of gender to begin with, prior to the sexuality debates on gender, etc. And gender became a category of all NGO funding. If that funding today is restricted, if developmental work and activity is restricted, then jobs are also fewer even in those categories. Thirdly, within, from Beijing onwards, definitely, if not earlier, actually from the mid-70s, there has been some commitment of the state and governments, irrespective of which ideology, to some creation of some kind of a national machinery, because this is also part of UN reporting. National machinery level, what has your government done in the last 5 years, or be it about MDGs, SDGs, etc., for women? So there are openings there also. Of course, these are restricted, and if at the level of government policy, women are seen as marginal, I mean, they may be seen as a very big political constituency. You can see that in every election now. But in terms of putting your money there, nothing. I mean, women's organizations have been critiquing this for a long time. In fact, there are attempts by governments to reconstitute the field. I remember in around 2000, 2000, a circular was issued from the ministry, and I think it came through the UGC, saying all centers should be redesignated as women and family studies. You'll find a signature campaign was conducted, and that memorandum was published in the EPW around that time. Finally, they stopped, but otherwise, they were trying to reconstitute the centers as women and family. And that also led to a whole debate on, what about women? What about family? Which family? What is your construction of the family, etc., etc., Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, ma'am. I'm Sumit. Hello.
Yes, Sumit.
I'm Sumit from Bihar.
Mm.
My question is that Bihar government recently advertised 4,638 post of assistant professor, and there is no any space for the students of women studies. It is the fact that Patna University and Magadha University, both the University of Bihar, frequently providing the master and PhD degree to the students. In these circumstances, what will the students who have master and PhD degree in women study will do? And second question is which type of we are struggling for changing this situation, and what kind of support we can achieve from IAWS and CWDS. CWDS for our
Look, CWDS is one institution. It is, yes, it is a founding institution in the IWS. And let me tell you, the IWS for the last 5-6 years has really taken up this battle. You will remember in 2017, I think, they had wanted to stop all funding. And at that time, Indrani was the general secretary, and I remember a whole convention was organized in Delhi, which created a lot of, generated a lot of discussion, and it was reported also in the papers, etc. So the minister came out with a statement saying there is no plan to stop funding for women's studies centers. So look, it is a world where you have to negotiate. IWS has from at least from 2014 in recent phase, I have to say, continuously engaged with the Standing Committee on Women's Studies and the UGC, and given several memoranda, held meetings. I remember in 2014-15, some meetings were held with the committee members in CWDS, but it was under the platform of the IWS. CWDS is really not part of the UGC. You know, CWDS falls under the ICSSR, which is a different stream within the government and within higher education. But IWS has been engaging, from what I know, from what I see in the group, WhatsApp groups, etc., and from what I hear from Mani, as well as from Mira, who's the president, Anaga. So that has to continue. But I think you people should gather all this information. Say, when did the department that you study, when was the course started? How many students have passed out? How many have found jobs or not found jobs? What are the issues? You know, if you start putting that information together, it can be both an interesting research kind of review from collectively. You can do it in different locations, regional locations, etc. also. But also you have to understand that certain universities get their funding from state funds. So while you negotiate with the UGC, it is also important to negotiate with the, at one point they said something about RUSA, I think, Rashtriya Uchtar Shiksha Abhiyan, I don't know, RUSA, I remember they talked about it.
Abhiyan.
Huh? Abhiyan.
Abhiyan Rajya.
Yeah, Abhiyan. And they said, because that funding, for instance, I've been on advisory committees of certain women's studies centers where the university has said these posts will come from the state government. So you have to push for the state government to accept, to fund, and that is when the vacancy will be recognized. So, you know, those issues have to be pursued, just as the whole point of being recognized in different disciplines must be, you know, if women's studies is interdisciplinary, then that interdisciplinarity has to be recognized rather than created as a point of exclusion of women's studies scholars and those who pass out. So, you know, these are constructive engagements. Very concretely, they have to be done at your university level, at the level of your state, as well as at the level of UGC. IWS, I think, look, I'm not, I mean, I'm a member of the IWS. I've been its general secretary earlier, but I'm not in the present EC. But I think IWS is very, very open to receiving suggestions, and they have been very active on it from what I know. They have not been sitting over this matter at all. They have come to, from 2014 at least, I can say. In fact, I did not pursue this so much, I have to say, but my successors have pursued it very concretely. I'm aware of it.
We have right to IAWS, but IAWS has doing nothing it now.
I don't know about that. I'm not sure. I would not say they are doing nothing because from what I have seen on their group, in fact, even the last circular that has come giving an extension, I think IWS was part of those negotiations with the UGC Standing Committee. You may have to wait for a month because it's the IWS is caught up in election. Yeah, Mani will know that better than me. Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Smith is asking this question. So we have been representing the latest letter we have submitted to the chair of UGC, because we tried with MHRD when UGC said that the report has been submitted and we are waiting. Then we went there to MHRD and represented. And later we came to understand that there is some communication gap, and then represented to chair. And after that only, in a day or two, we got this extension. So IAWS has been doing, and we know we don't take even a single day to wait if there is nothing happening. So first we represented the secretary, and we also, to your knowledge, I don't know whether you had got from your teachers. We went on February 1st and had a meeting for about 45 minutes with secretary UGC, and where we had this national conference also. So we represented the memorandum in detail, what has to be, whatever we have been now discussing in this student forum also had already been submitted. And this was the first time UGC secretary was saying that we are waiting for MHRD's nod. So something is to be done with MHRD now. And so UGC secretary was all along supportive, and he was very sure, saying in every meeting that there won't be any issue of women's studies giving up, and continuous support will be there. And whatever we have been asking also, he was very positive. But in February 1st meeting only, he was saying that it is not in our hands, it is MHRD. So whatever we have to proceed now is to be with MHRD, and now it is Ministry of Education. And IAWS is keen, and thanks to UGC also, UGC has been responding, though with a delay. Even the latest letter of extension we got is also through pressure, and the very Joint Secretary of UGC, Dr. Archana Thakur herself acknowledged there in the Women's Studies group that thanks to IAWS for continuous pressure. So this is what it is happening, and please understand that Indian Association for Women's Studies, as Indu rightly pointed out, has been pestering for the past 4 or 5 years to make it, the irregular funding should not be there, and it has to be continuous. And also whatever the other demands, I very much acknowledge Veena Mazumdar's recommendation should be implemented, and we have been also doing that, except some of the centers, even in the chat box, we could see that some of them are saying that the universities are not taking the position into permanency. So in some centers, including our Bharathasan University, way back in 2004-05, we got it, but in 2007 itself, it had become a department, and was also permanent positions. So as it was pointed out there in the guidelines, every university has to follow. That is not happening, and there is a lack of political will to take this forward by the state government also. I admit here that there are a number of new departments coming up there in the university system. It is not that no departments are coming up, and either university is funding or they get the state concurrence and do it. But as it was discussed, women's studies has always been marginalized, and they don't take it as a mainstream department equivalent to other departments. So these are the issues that we have to take it forward, and we have already been discussing this in the forum and in IAWS also. So let us wait what has to be done further. Thank you, Indu, for the space given. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Adira, yeah. You find any other question? Otherwise, we can. Yeah.
Yeah. There was one other question by Shahida. Shahida asking whether introducing. Is it audible?
Please ask others to mute. Some sound is coming.
Yeah. There was a question by Shahida whether introducing women's studies at the UG level improve the situation. Ma'am?
Well, it definitely will. If there is more demand in terms of teaching. For instance, you have to understand the education courses. In fact, more than 20 years ago, it was very categorically. I think even the previous national education policy laid emphasis on teacher training. In fact, Anita Rampal and all are critiquing the new educational policy on that ground also, that enough investment or enough attention is not being focused on teacher training. The previous education policy did talk about investing in teacher training, and investing meant not just money, but also in terms of ideas. And you will remember that, for instance, Delhi University has 2 levels of courses. One is the B.Ed course, which is for Bachelor of Education. It also has a course called BA in Elementary Education, BL-Ed courses, which is a 4-year course at the undergraduate level, which has gender as a component both in the social science foundational courses as well as separate papers on gender and schooling, etc. I have taught that paper when I was teaching in the college in Delhi University, and this is it's important. It is important both in terms of creating jobs, of course, but it is also important in creating sensitivity towards issues of women and gender, etc., in the minds of teachers while they are training to be teachers. So that is one. Secondly, I think some of the new courses that Delhi University offers, I'm not so familiar with other university patterns at the BA program level. In some components, some modules or units are incorporated into other courses, foundational courses, and that also creates scope for both reading, writing, research, and teaching around women and gender. IGNOU, for instance, has had courses where its foundational units have modules on women and gender, women studies also. So there is scope, and it is not just in terms of creating jobs for women studies people, but the fact is that today it is very clear that you need, if society has to advance and you have to develop into a modern democracy and allow for democratic sort of development in terms of societal domain, in terms of social interaction, today greater sensitivity to gender and a commitment to gender equality and women's equality is the norm, and it has to be projected, it has to be accepted. And for that, I think a lot more discussion has to happen, both at the school level. In fact, that point is there in Vinadi's report also, and at one point UGC had set up committees to develop curricula at different levels. I think they just abandoned the whole exercise. They abandoned a lot of effort had been put in. I have seen some of those courses that were developed, but they were abandoned at, I think, some 15 years ago.
Okay, ma'am, I think we can take in one last question. Is that okay for you, ma'am?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, PM Ranjit was asking for.
I'm audible, Abhina?
Yeah.
I took your prior permission because this is nothing related to employability per se, because many questions came on regarding that. This is regarding a disciplinary issue. I just want to know ma'am's opinion. I did my master's in women's studies from IGNOU on-campus program. They actually have a full-fledged school of gender and development studies. When I joined in 2011, the faculty strength was around 5. Even they had hired like young faculty who had just completed PhD and all, but I couldn't find a single faculty who actually came from women's studies discipline, like someone who has done MA, MPhil or PhD from any women's studies center. And when I joined in JNU for MPhil, which was a center which they don't offer MA courses, but they were more looking into research oriented things. There also the faculty strength was somewhere around 5 or 6. They had couple of young faculty, but again the same situation. There were faculties from English literature, there were faculties from political science, there were faculties from history, but none of them were from particularly from women's studies background. So I'm just asking, is this actually pose a disciplinary problem for women's studies? Because in a research center, the students are then indirectly forced to opt for topics where the guides, for what the guides are available. Obviously, they will be available for topics or subject areas which they had done research or they had published at all. So this is actually very strange, because I didn't see anybody from these two places which I did my courses. I didn't find anybody who was coming from women's studies background. Have you seen this as a disciplinary problem?
Well,
for the center?
look, I'm aware of what you're saying. I don't see it necessarily as a problem. But I did in my presentation refer to the fact that some formula needs to be worked out in terms of recruitment practices and patterns to ensure that women's studies students are not discriminated against either in other interdisciplinary contexts or in their own field of women's studies. What you are saying refers to the fact that, look, let's face it, prior to 2000, I cannot remember. I think one of the first syllabus drawing exercises for master's level that I was involved with was with Vardha. And then around, I think then also Jamia also had some committee set up to discuss some of these drawing these courses, etc. Then Lucknow started. So the fact is that our master's courses started much later, and even the doctoral research program started only after the mid-90s. So it takes time for students to emerge and then be enrolled, that too at the university level you're talking about. Okay, I mean, unlike Delhi University, which has say hundreds of colleges, we are talking about university level recruitment, which is tougher. You know, usually a fresh graduate student, a fresh, even doctoral student will not get be given an opportunity at the university level. So because there are norms for recruitment which say so many years of teaching. Now, if your master's program and your doctoral programs in women's studies have started only around, say, now 15-20 years ago, but at that time when some of these departments were set up, it was even less time. So the number of people were not available from here. The only students you can get who have been coming from women's studies, say 15-20 years ago, could only be students coming from foreign universities, because Indian universities were not offering those programs. That is one. But I agree with you that there is a problem that if women's studies accepts other disciplines and other disciplines are not going to accept women's studies scholars, then where are women's studies scholars going to go? That is at the level of jobs, vacancies, and recruitment patterns. The second aspect of your question relates to what we call, I mean, it is the success of women's studies. It is the success of the women's studies perspective, which enriched other disciplines, which therefore then and allowed for scholars to undertake research with a focus on women. So it is the success of women's studies which we are, in a sense, talking about, which opened up new questions, new intellectual queries, and allowed for students from all those disciplines to undertake research in newer areas and have enriched those disciplines. So it needs to be accepted that women's studies perspective, the strategy was successful. It transformed disciplines. It democratized those disciplines also, maybe in terms of the subjects and objects of critical inquiry. However, that success should not be allowed to become a limitation for women's studies scholars per se. And for that, the UGC and universities have to be engaged and drawn into a discussion saying, how do we overcome this problem? Which did not exist 20 years ago, I would say, because there were no scholars coming with a women's studies degree 20 years ago. It's only over the last decade and more that this problem has cropped up.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think we can conclude now. It's already.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
I have one question.
It's not the discussion or the UGC is concentrating only on a higher education or in a university level, and how the women studies students will get the job opportunities in other departments or in other state governments department, and how many state government got the proposals and how many proposals are sanctioned for the job in employment sectors. For example, in a Department of Women and Child or a Devadasi prohibition centers or in many departments are there for the job opportunities. How many state government and how the department and centers sent the proposals, and how many proposals are sanctioned for the employment for students getting employment? My question.
Look, I am not sure if I get your question. As far as numbers go, how many, I cannot say. Sitting here in Delhi, how can I tell you how many state departments have got proposals? I cannot say. I think over the last 20 years, what I have seen is that funds for research with government bodies are not actually lacking. You know, in the 80s, even the National Commission for Women in India had hardly any money for research. Today, you go NCW, you go to even Science and Technology, DST, they have, I've been on the expert committee for proposals, and they have huge funds. So funds for research are available with the MWCD also. And I'm sure they will be available to some extent in the state also. The point is who's cornering those funds and what is the transparency in terms of inviting proposals, proposals and sanctioning of those proposals. I think greater transparency and accountability is required. To my mind, funds are lacking in the university system for women studies centers. But has UGC cut down on funding in terms of research? I think UGC has huge funds for research, huge funds. Where it's going is a question. There you have to intervene, and those sitting in those committees have to be engaged with and made more accountable in terms of where the money is being put. On all bodies, on all government bodies, I think that transparency should be there in terms of the committees which vet the proposals, how proposals are invited, how much publicity is given. Why should there not be a category kept aside in terms of, say, students who are unemployed? How is it that those who are already employed get many more resources to do research? I mean, they may be doing very good research, so I don't have a problem with senior professors and faculty getting funds for research. But how it should be, we should move towards a system where this bridge category of students who may have passed out of their research location and may yet to get a permanent tenure in any university or a higher education institution. How, I mean, you know, what I'm saying is that engagement has to be enter into both with the university system, the UGC, and all government bodies, and thinking has to be developed around that. But if the thinking of the government is that the university system is only producing dissenters, it's only producing people who raise political slogans which are inimical to the philosophy and functioning of the government, then what I'm saying is it's not going to happen. There has to be a constructive, positive engagement both within the university system as well as outside the university system, and in terms of education policy. But if the engagement is going to happen on the lines that these are all creating nuisance, that all this question and discussion around gender is some kind of a gender war against, traditional sensibilities and institutions in our society, it's not going to happen. Increasingly, the public discourse is getting more and more hostile. That's the question I was raising when I talked of the backlash, that there is a sort of societal slant which smacks of a kind of hostile environment to women in society. If that is the environment in which women's studies is going to locate and find a slot for itself, it becomes more and more difficult. That is why I'm saying a constructive dialogue and engagement has to happen, and systems have to be built in within our academic platforms and our institutions and academic bodies to ensure that democratic space, democratic dialogue, and fund allocation, as well as an openness to new academic, debates and discussions, that has to be ensured before that can happen. That's what I feel. I mean, apart from continuous negotiation with state level departments, etc., for that also, the women's studies centers also have to build those linkages. You have to build those linkages. You can't have an attitude of hostility to institutions and then want institutions to respect you and accommodate you. I'm not saying that you have to be sycophants. You don't have to be incorporated into governmental agendas. No. But women's studies has to dialogue with the policy framework in order to find more space for itself, and in order to find more space for itself to contribute to that dialogue in more constructive ways. And I think that was the agenda that women's studies started out with. That was the space women's studies tried to create. And it is important that we guard that space today, because that space stands threatened today. Not just in terms of our existence as women's studies centers or the jobs we create, but in terms of that larger dialogue which needs to happen in our society, so that if a woman stands up and says, look, I have been sexually harassed, then Me Too people are not trolled and driven to, whether it's a rape victim, sexual assault victim, or a student at the higher level, should they be driven to suicide? Should they have to struggle? Do you need a dharna and protest for 1 week for police to register an FIR? I mean, that's the world we are living in today. And such hostility and yet such absolute disdain for procedures, for processes. So what I'm saying is women's studies centers have to make space within the university systems, within the institutions of higher education, for their existence, for a constructive dialogue on their terms and on their on the opportunities that they need to open up. And you need to involve the larger university communities, be it student bodies, be it teachers bodies, to so that they also own your agenda. They should own your agenda. The students should, the teachers platforms should, because I mean, I have always maintained, and my experience tells me, that it is the democratic teachers movements which have often created those spaces in the higher institution, education institutions. So we also need to think about how we conduct that dialogue, how we build that dialogue constructively. You need allies. I mean, the women's movement needs allies. Women need allies to fight their battles individually, whether it's in society or in families. You all need allies, and today women's studies needs allies within the higher education establishment to ensure A, its continued existence, B, stability, C, existence and stability to constructively contribute, which it has already done. It has already done that. It needs to be recognized. That's what I feel.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for the session, and thank you for taking these many questions and taking time to explain it in a very understandable way. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Adira, 1 second. Adira?
Yeah, ma'am.
I'll just, in addition to what Indu was saying, there is also another point I want to make here. I was there in the committees of selection of the evaluation of the project proposals in NCW UGC. wherein I found in the NCW proposals, a majority of the proposals had come from other than women's studies. I wonder. In fact, I have been sharing the proposals, call for proposals to various women's study centers, but still I could see at least around 80% of the proposals or even more than that come from other. And the beauty is that many, I mean, at least around 30 to 40% of the proposals are from management department. Used to be from management department, and some of the women's studies directors also called me and asked how these NCW is funding only for management department. But the fact is that the management departments are other science departments are applying for the projects, whether it is training projects, workshop projects, or research projects. So I think we have to keep that in mind. That is one thing. On the one hand, it is also like if really it is perspective building and the research is being taken up by other departments, it is getting mainstreamed. That sense it is. But I don't think that it's all done in a perspective. And second, in the UGC also, we could see, say for example, economics, there will be 200 proposals, whereas in women's studies, we hardly had 12 or 15 proposals. So that is a kind of a response, and that too all drawn from various interdisciplines, not from women's studies. For even women's studies proposals in major research projects in UGC. So all these are all facts I am sharing here, and it has to go to the women's studies centers. And there are several women's studies department and centers who have got funding other than UGC and making themselves surviving. So that is very important, and this is a message I'm giving here. The fact, since I was there in a couple of committees. So in addition to whatever Indu was saying, this is also very important, that fund is there or fund is not there. The question is that whether women's study centers are really participating in submitting the proposals whenever there is a call for proposal. And even for that also, the centers to department status is very important. I don't say that NCW or UGC are not funding to the centers. Even if you submit a center, it will be funded. But still, to get the statutory status, if it has become a department, that will be still contributing. So I think in the respective universities, not only the faculty members, the students too should be part of it in the whatever lobbying to be done to make it department, and so that all the statutory positions will be there and permanency, and of course recognized the discipline. I mean, the discipline will be recognized and more openings will be there. That is the concern of the students also. At least one part of it I'm saying. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mani. That was very, very welcome intervention. Thank you.
Thanks, Indu, for being here, and you have spent around 2 hours. Indeed, I'm sorry
you.
We have really taxed you, but you have convincingly responded, and I think the students will be happy to proceed on whatever. And you brought the broad history, which even women's studies faculty would not have got informed on the kind of discussions you all had, and how people were really pressurizing government and the UGC to get this women's studies to this shape now. So thank you once again on behalf of the students forum, and there will be a formal thank from the students also. Thank you, Artira. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.